1956, America. They were one of the most beloved vocal groups in the country. Only You played on every radio station across the nation. The Great Pretenders sat at the top of the charts for weeks on end. The Platters had achieved the kind of success that most musicians only dream about, selling millions of records and performing for adoring crowds wherever they went. But that night, backstage at a major concert venue, the words they heard shattered their hearts into a million pieces. The concert organizer walked into their dressing room, looked them straight in the eyes, and spoke with a coldness that cut deeper than any knife. "You are not real artists. You do not know how to sing." The members of the Platters looked at each other in disbelief. They did not know what to say. Years of hard work, countless hours of rehearsal, and the sacrifices they had made to perfect their craft, all of it suddenly felt meaningless. But that night, help would come from a place they never expected. Louis Armstrong was backstage that evening, waiting for his own performance. He had heard the commotion coming from down the hallway. He had heard the cruel words being hurled at these young artists. Armstrong stopped and listened. He knew the Platters. He knew their music. He knew the talent that poured out of them every time they opened their mouths to sing. And something stirred deep inside him. That night, Louis Armstrong had not come just to play music. That night, he had come to be a hero. If you love stories about the legends who stood up for what was right, make sure to subscribe to this channel right now. We bring you the untold stories of courage and kindness from music history. Hit that subscribe button and join our family on... But before we get to what happened next in that hallway, we need to go back. We need to understand who these young artists were, what they had overcome, and why Louis Armstrong felt compelled to step in. The information in this video is compiled from documented interviews, archival news, books, and historical reports. For narrative purposes, some parts are dramatized and may not represent 100% factual accuracy. We also use AI-assisted visuals and AI narration for cinematic reconstruction. The use of AI does not mean the story is fake. It is a storytelling tool. Our goal is to recreate the spirit of that era as faithfully as possible. Enjoy watching. The Platters came together in Los Angeles in the early 1950s, a group of young African-American singers who shared a dream of making it big in the music industry. The original lineup went through several changes before settling into the combination that would make history. Tony Williams became the lead tenor, and his voice would become the signature sound that defined the group. His tenor was smooth, rich, and capable of conveying emotions that touched the deepest parts of the human heart. Zola Taylor, one of the few female members of a major vocal group at that time, added a unique dimension to their harmonies. Her presence broke barriers in an era when vocal groups were almost exclusively male. David Lynch, Herb Reed, and Paul Roby rounded out the quintet, each bringing their own distinct vocal talents to create something truly special. Their harmonies were intricate, sophisticated, and unlike anything else on the radio at that time. Their manager, Buck Ram, saw the potential in this group and worked tirelessly to get them a recording contract. It was not easy. Record labels in the 1950s were hesitant to sign black vocal groups, no matter how talented they were. The music industry was dominated by white executives who often viewed black artists as risky investments, as novelties rather than serious musicians. But Ram persisted, believing in his artists when no one else would. And finally, Mercury Records agreed to give the Platters a chance. In 1955, the Platters released a song that would change their lives forever. Only You started as a modest regional hit. But something about Tony Williams' voice, something about the way the harmonies swelled and the emotion poured through every note, captured the hearts of listeners across America. The song climbed the charts, eventually reaching number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 on the Rhythm and Blues charts. Suddenly, the Platters were no longer just another vocal group struggling to get noticed. They were stars. Later that same year, they released The Great Pretender, and this time there was no doubt about their talent. The song shot to number 1 on both the pop and rhythm and blues charts, making the Platters one of the first black vocal groups to achieve crossover success on that scale. They were invited to appear on television shows, to perform at prestigious venues, to tour the country and even the world. But success did not protect them from the harsh realities of 1950s America. Have you ever experienced a moment when your achievements were dismissed by someone in power? That feeling of having everything you worked for suddenly questioned? Let us know in the comments how you handled it. Despite their chart-topping success, the Platters faced constant reminders that America was not ready to fully accept black artists as equals. They performed at venues where they were not allowed to enter through the front door. They stayed at hotels that would not let them sleep in the same rooms as white guests. They ate at restaurants that served them in the kitchen rather than the dining room. The music industry was particularly cruel. White artists regularly recorded cover versions of songs originally performed by black musicians. And these covers often received more radio play and generated more sales than the originals. The Platters were fortunate that their versions of Only You and The Great Pretender became definitive, but they knew that their success could be taken away at any moment. They had to be twice as good just to be considered half as worthy. And some people in the industry never let them forget it. While the Platters were riding their wave of success, Louis Armstrong was already a legend. By the mid-1950s, Armstrong had been at the top of the jazz world for over 3 decades. His journey had begun in the poorest neighborhoods of New Orleans, in a place they called the battlefield, where he grew up surrounded by poverty and hardship that would have broken most people. His father abandoned the family when Louis was an infant. His mother struggled to keep food on the table. Young Louis spent time in a reform school after a youthful mistake, but it was there that he discovered his gift for music. A teacher handed him a cornet, and everything changed. Armstrong's talent was undeniable, and he rose through the ranks of the jazz world with a combination of innovation, charisma, and hard work that no one could match. By the 1950s, he was not just a musician, he was an American icon. His face appeared on magazine covers. His voice came through radios in homes across the world. Presidents invited him to the White House. Foreign governments requested him for diplomatic tours. But despite all his success, Louis Armstrong never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the struggles he had faced as a young black man trying to make it in a world that did not want to give him a chance. If you're enjoying this story about courage and kindness, please take a moment to subscribe. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to life. It was a warm evening in 1956 when fate brought Louis Armstrong and the Platters together at the same venue. Armstrong was headlining a major concert, and the Platters had been added to the bill as one of the opening acts. The venue was packed with thousands of eager fans, and the energy backstage was electric. The Platters were in their dressing room, putting the finishing touches on their costumes and running through their harmonies one last time. They were nervous but excited. The opening for Louis Armstrong was a tremendous honor, and they wanted to give the performance of their lives. But then the door opened, and the concert organizer walked in. His name does not matter. What matters is what he said. He was a man who had power in the music industry, a man who could make or break careers with a single phone call, and he had decided that the Platters did not belong on his stage. He stood in the doorway, looking at these young artists with contempt in his eyes, and he spoke words that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The organizer did not mince words. He told the Platters that they were not real singers. He told them that their success was a fluke, that they had gotten lucky, that they did not deserve to be on the same bill as Louis Armstrong. He questioned their talent, their professionalism. They're very right to call themselves artists. The members of the Platters stood in stunned silence. Tony Williams, whose voice had touched millions of hearts, felt his confidence crumble. Zola Taylor, who had broken barriers as a female member of a major vocal group, felt tears forming in her eyes. The others looked at the floor, unable to meet the organizer's gaze. What could they say? This man had power over their careers. If they talked back, if they defended themselves, he could make sure they never performed at a major venue again. So they stood there, absorbing the verbal assault, feeling smaller and smaller with each passing second. What the organizer did not know was that Louis Armstrong had been walking down the hallway at that exact moment. Armstrong was on his way to his own dressing room when he heard the raised voice coming from behind the partially open door. He stopped. He listened, and what he heard made his blood boil. Armstrong knew exactly what was happening. He had experienced it himself countless times throughout his career. He had been told he was not good enough, that he did not belong, that his music was just noise. He had faced racism and discrimination at every turn, and he had overcome it all through sheer talent and determination. But he had never forgotten how it felt to be young and vulnerable, to have someone with power try to crush your dreams with cruel words. Armstrong made a decision in that moment. He could walk away. He could pretend he had not heard anything. He could focus on his own performance and let these young artists fend for themselves. But that was not who Louis Armstrong was. That had never been who he was. Louis Armstrong pushed open the door and stepped into the dressing room. The organizer turned around, and his expression shifted from contempt to surprise. He had not expected anyone to interrupt his lecture, least of all the headliner of the show. Armstrong looked at the organizer with a calm but firm expression. Then he looked at the Platters, these young artists who stood with their heads bowed and their spirits crushed. And then Louis Armstrong spoke. His words were measured, controlled, but carried a weight that filled the entire room. He told the organizer that the Platters were among the finest vocal groups in America. He told him that their harmonies were flawless, their timing impeccable, their ability to connect with an audience unmatched. He told him that if anyone did not belong at this venue, it was someone who could not recognize true talent when it was standing right in front of him. The room went completely quiet. The organizer's face turned red. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. He was used to being the most powerful person in any room, used to artists bowing to his demands and accepting his criticism without question. But here was Louis Armstrong, the most famous musician in America, standing up to him in defense of a group of young artists he barely knew. The organizer opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. What could he say? Armstrong's reputation was untouchable. His influence in the music industry was enormous. If Armstrong wanted to make a scene, if he wanted to tell the press what had happened backstage, the organizer's career could be damaged beyond repair. So the organizer did the only thing he could do. He turned around and walked out of the room without another word. Have you ever witnessed someone stand up for another person who is being treated unfairly? Those moments stay with us forever. Share your story in the comments. After the organizer left, Louis Armstrong turned to the Platters. The young artists were still in shock, unable to fully process what had just happened. Armstrong's expression softened, and he spoke to them with a warmth that contrasted sharply with the harshness they had just experienced. He told them not to let anyone make them feel small. He told them that their talent was real, their success was earned, and their place in music history was secure. He told them that people like that organizer would always exist, people who felt threatened by the success of others and tried to tear them down. But the only way to respond to such people was to keep doing what they did best, to keep making beautiful music, to keep proving the doubters wrong with every note they sang. That night, the Platters took the stage and delivered one of the best performances of their careers. The audience had no idea what had happened backstage. They only knew that when Tony Williams opened his mouth and the first notes of Only You Filled the Arena, something magical was happening. The harmonies were tighter than ever. The emotion was deeper than ever. The connection with the audience was stronger than ever. Perhaps it was the adrenaline from the confrontation. Perhaps it was the boost of confidence that Armstrong's defense had given them. Whatever it was, the Platters sang their hearts out that night, and the crowd responded with thunderous applause. When Louis Armstrong took the stage later in the evening, he made a point to mention the Platters during his set. He told the audience that they had just witnessed one of the finest vocal groups in America. He told them to remember the name the Platters because they were going to be around for a long time. The audience cheered, and somewhere backstage the young artists who had been so cruelly dismissed just hours earlier felt their confidence restored. What happened that night was more than just a single act of kindness. It was the beginning of a friendship that would last for years and stand as a testament to the bonds that can form when one person extends a hand to another in their moment of need. Louis Armstrong and the Platters crossed paths many times in the years that followed, and every time they did, Armstrong treated them with the same warmth and respect he had shown that night in the dressing room. He invited them to perform at events where he was headlining. He spoke highly of them in interviews with journalists and radio hosts. He made sure that the music industry knew that the Platters had his full support and his complete admiration. For their part, the Platters never forgot what Armstrong had done for them. In interviews throughout their careers, they spoke of that night as a turning point. There was a moment that restored their faith, not just in themselves, but in the entire music industry. They spoke of Armstrong not just as a musical legend, but as a man of extraordinary character who used his influence to lift others up rather than to keep them down. They told the story to young musicians they mentored, passing on the lesson that true greatness requires more than talent. If this story of courage and kindness has moved you, please make sure you are subscribed to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear about the power of standing up for others. Louis Armstrong passed away on July 6, 1971, but his legacy extends far beyond his music. He is remembered not just for his trumpet playing, not just for his distinctive voice, not just for his innovations in jazz that changed the course of American music forever. He is remembered for moments like the one that happened backstage that night, moments when he chose to use his power and influence to help others rather than to advance his own interests. Throughout his career, Armstrong had countless opportunities to step aside and let others fight their own battles. But that was never his way. He understood that true greatness is not measured by the awards on your shelf or the records you sell. It is measured by how you treat others, especially those who have less power than you. The Platters continued to perform for decades, and their music remains beloved to this day. Songs like Only You and The Great Pretender are still played at weddings and restaurants, on radio stations around the world. Their harmonies still bring tears to the eyes of listeners who remember the golden age of vocal groups. And whenever they were asked about the most meaningful moments of their careers, they always mentioned that night. They always mentioned Louis Armstrong. They always spoke of the man who stepped into a room full of cruelty and brought kindness instead. Some stories are about music. This one is about something more profound, something more lasting. It is about what it means to see injustice and refuse to look away. It is about what it means to have power and choose to use it for good. It is about what it means to be a true legend, not just in talent, but in character. Louis Armstrong could have walked past that dressing room that night. He could have pretended not to hear the cruel words being hurled at those young artists. He could have focused on his own career and his own performance and let those young artists fend for themselves, but he did not. He stepped in. He spoke up. He reminded everyone in that room what true greatness looks like. And in doing so, he gave the Platters something more valuable than any chart position or record sales could ever provide. He gave them their dignity back. He gave them the courage to continue. He gave them a memory they would carry for the rest of their lives. That is the story of a night when cruel words met courageous action. That is the story of Louis Armstrong and the Platters. That is the story of how one act of kindness can echo through decades and remind us all what it truly means to be great.